Hi friend, it's Simi John. I am so glad that you are here as we continue our talk on the topic of purpose. Now don't forget to show me some love and support and hit the subscribe button. It'll make sure that you don't miss any of the videos in this series. Remember, you were made on purpose and for a purpose. Let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Karen Harmon and I am so honored and excited to be a guest here at Simi John TV today, where we're going to talk about how worship is part of our purpose. In an earlier video, Simi had kind of broken down the difference between callings and purpose, how callings change depending on our assignment and our season in life, but how our purpose does not change. And she broke down Genesis 2 and talked about three different things that we were created for specifically. One is for relationship, two is for influence, and three is for worship. And it's that worship part that we're going to talk about today as a key aspect in being able to figure out and know what our purpose is. But before we get started, I wanted to kind of introduce myself so you get to know me a little bit more. My husband Lee and I have been married a little over 14 years or so. We have 3 children, 2 girls ages 11 and 8, and then a little boy who is 5 months old now. I primarily stay home and homeschool the older 2, but I also work as a physical therapist and serve in various ministries at our local church and do a little writing and speaking on the side as well. But my passion and my heart is actually worship ministry. And I've been doing that for a little over 25 years or so, which is crazy to say out loud that it's been that long. But I love it. I love talking about it. I love doing it. And I love discussing it. So today we're actually going to answer 3 questions on what worship is and how that is in relationship to our purpose, and kind of unpack that a little bit. So the first thing is, what is worship? The second question that we're going to answer is, why should we worship? And the third question we're going to answer is, how do we worship? So what is worship? By definition, worship is to show reverence, adoration, and honor. You know, we see worship sometimes as just the 20 or 30 minutes that we sing and do the music and everything at the beginning of our church service. But truthfully, worship is so much more than that, and it's a lifestyle. Psalms 71:8 says, "My mouth is filled with your praise, declaring your splendor all day long." Worship is a lifestyle of adoration and honor to the Lord. That is what worship is. And we're going to unpack that idea of worship being a lifestyle a little bit later on today. Number 2, why should we worship? And the answer to that is very simple. We were created to worship. Unfortunately, that innate desire to worship can sometimes be misdirected, especially in our humanness. Sometimes we worship celebrities. Sometimes we worship recognition, how many followers we have, how many likes we get on social media. Sometimes we can worship exercise or fashion. Sometimes we even worship Christian speakers and bloggers and bands and music. And those things are not wrong in and of themselves, but what's wrong is to worship those things, because that worship is misguided. The Bible is clear to whom our worship should be for. In Psalms 29:2, it says, "Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness." And even when he was being tempted by Satan, Jesus said in Luke 4:8, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." When we live in the constant awareness that everything was created by God and ultimately for his glory, it creates a desire in us to praise him and worship him. I love to say this: praise him for what the Lord has done. Worship him for who he is. When you know the true character of God, when we realize that character, who he is, his goodness, his faithfulness, his unconditional love, it just makes it so much easier to worship and adore him. So we've answered the question, what is worship? We've answered the question, why should we worship? And now we're going to talk a little bit about how do we worship. And the biggest way that we worship is through our lives, our lifestyle. Romans 12:1-2 says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." It's right there, offering our bodies through our actions and with our heart is worship. Now, practically speaking, what does that look like when we think about worship? Well, like we talked about earlier, worship can be at the beginning of a service, right? In church, where we sing, we can clap our hands, we lift our hands, sometimes we bow down. Those are all expressions that we're using our bodies to show honor and reverence and adoration to the Lord. But I want to challenge you in something. I don't want you to see worship as just something you reserve for the weekend service, for Saturday night or Sunday morning or whenever it is that you meet together at your church. I want you to see worship outside of the four walls of the church. Bring it into your life, bring it into your home, bring it into your work. Bring it into your tasks and your housework and all the things that you do, even your hobbies, your talents, your interests. Worship can be a part of all of that. Something that I like to do at the house when I'm even just doing things around the house or when I'm on my way to work even, is to turn on some worship music. Worship music sets an atmosphere in your home. Sometimes the kids wake up a little cranky, sometimes I wake up a little cranky, and it's pretty amazing what happens when that worship music comes on. It literally brings peace, it brings joy, it brings a calmness into our home. It literally changes the atmosphere. So that's something that I practically do here at the house when things are going a little crazy and I need some peace. You know, in Psalm 16:11, it says that in his presence is fullness of joy. And so a lot of times too, especially as moms, as women, as students, as career women, as stay-at-home moms, we have all these different roles that we play, and sometimes life can really weigh us down and we wonder where the joy is. And Psalm 16 tells us where the joy is. It's in his presence. And a lot of times we can usher in that presence by worshiping him, by adoring him, by thanking him, by telling him how amazing he is, to magnify him, to glorify him, to tell him how much you love him for his goodness, for his mercy, that you love him for just who he is. And that alone brings joy into our lives. Sometimes it's hard to get into his presence. We don't feel like it physically. We're tired. We're exhausted. Sometimes we just don't want to. Maybe there's some anger going on. Maybe there's some bitterness or some unforgiveness that you're holding on to. Sometimes I know for me, I have to crawl to his presence, but it's so vital and it's so important to get into his presence. You will find everything that you need there. Another way that I practically worship is I love to think about that verse, in Colossians 3, I believe it's verse 23 or 24, where it says to do everything for the Lord and not unto men. And I apply that in my work, in my household tasks, in the things that I have to do. If I keep the mindset that I'm doing everything for the Lord and I'm doing everything for his glory, that is an aspect of worship, that I'm doing it for him. And what's really cool is, I'll share a little story with you. At work, I remember one time one of my coworkers, we were just talking a little bit about church, and she wasn't quite sure about all of this Jesus stuff and everything, but I knew she liked music, and so I told her, I said, well, you know what, back then there were CDs, that we didn't have iTunes and all of that years ago, so I said, well, here's a CD, I'd love for you to go listen to it, and it was a CD of one of my favorite worship bands, and I gave it to her. And she went and listened to it, and it sparked a conversation on the Lord. And I ended up being able to lead her to the Lord just from that one little thing. So you never know. Worship can even be a tool for evangelism. But people are watching the way that we live, that it's vital that we live in that atmosphere of loving the Lord and doing it all for him. Sometimes we can even worship when we see the beauty in nature, the vastness of the ocean, the beauty in the mountaintops. There is so many things that we see the Lord's hand in, and that's a way that we can worship him as well. Worship is to live in the constant awareness of who God is and to adore him for it. It's a huge part of our purpose here on earth. We were created for that relationship. We were created for influence, and we were created for worship. So no matter what happens in life, where you go or what you do, living with a lifestyle of worship, you will always know what your purpose is in life. I hope that encourages you today. Have a great rest of your day.